Hi, Ben Phillips here. I'm the rector of St. George's, and welcome to our Prayer Book 103 video, where we're going to be taking a look at the church year. This video is intended to be a short but comprehensive look at the church calendar or the church year. It's also known as the liturgical calendar or the liturgical year. If you're going to learn how to use the prayer book on your own, you have to have a basic working knowledge of the church calendar. Like learning how to drive a car, you don't need to understand internal combustion in order to drive, but you do know how to read the road signs. The church calendar is a little like a repeating set of road signs that guides our usage of the prayer book. The liturgical year is also intended to reshape the way that we perceive and experience the passage of time. That as time moves forward, we're continually brought into the life and the work and the teaching of Jesus Christ, and then living that life and that gospel reality out as time moves from week to week. If you already have a good working knowledge of the church calendar and are comfortable knowing where in the church year a particular Sunday falls, feel free to skip this video and pick up with our next video, the 104 video, where we'll be putting together a worship service based on our knowledge of the church calendar. So now we're going to walk through the church year using a slideshow I've put together, which will hopefully give you some visual aids as we put together how the church measures time year by year. As I said a moment ago, the church year not only guides how we use our prayer book, but it's intended to change the way we look at and experience the passage of time. Think of the church year as sitting above the standard calendar. The church year is directly connected to the standard calendar in many ways, but its emphasis is different. Rather than approaching the passage of time day by day, month by month, the passage of time is principally marked by Sundays, bringing our repeated attention back to the day of Jesus' resurrection. Thus, the primary metric or unit of the church year is a Sunday, of which there are 52 in a year. These 52 Sundays are organized into 6 seasons of the church year. 5 of those seasons take us through the first half of the year, which walks us through the life of Jesus. The 6th season brings us through the rest of the half of the year and focuses more or less on the life of the church, the people of Jesus. The entire church year is essentially anchored around 2 key points in the life of the Jesus. The first and foremost is Easter. Easter is the day of Jesus' resurrection. It is, without a doubt, the central day in the Christian year, and certainly the central moment in the life of Jesus and the central piece of Christian theology. So Easter Day is the first anchor point in the church year. The other is Christmas. So these 2 points, one marking the birth of Jesus at Christmas, the other marking the resurrection of Jesus at Easter, are the 2 anchor points around which the whole liturgical year is basically organized. So let's start with Christmas. Christmas always falls on December 25th, so that's one of the specific connections the church year has with the standard calendar. Christmas always falls on December 25th, no matter what. The 4 weeks prior to, or the 4 Sundays prior to Christmas are known as Advent. And it's important to note that Advent doesn't start on December 1st. It is measured in Sundays. So the 4 Sundays prior to Christmas are how we measure Advent. And the first Sunday of Advent is the start of the new church year. So New Year's Day in the church calendar is the first Sunday of Advent. Now, the first Sunday of Advent may fall in early December or even in late November, depending on which day of the week Christmas ends up falling. Christmas itself then is followed by a 12-day feast called Christmas Tide, which runs from December 25th to January 6th. Yes, there are 12 days of Christmas, not just one. And at the end of those 12 days, we celebrate what's called the Epiphany, always on January 6th. And the Epiphany is marked by the arrival of the wise men, the Magi from the East, who realize or have the aha moment of who Jesus is. And that's what we celebrate at the Feast of Epiphany, always on January 6th. Following Epiphany on January 6th is the season of Epiphany, or Epiphany Tide, and it can last anywhere from 5 to 8 Sundays. At the end of Epiphany, after the last Sunday of Epiphany, that Wednesday begins Lent on Ash Wednesday. Lent is always the exact same duration. It's always 6 Sundays prior to Easter. And the last week of Lent is what we call Holy Week. It begins with Palm Sunday, the last Sunday in Lent, and includes Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, as well as the Easter Vigil prior to the great feast of Easter itself. Depending on when Easter falls, Epiphany can shorten or lengthen. That's why I said it's anywhere from 5 to 8 Sundays, and that's contingent upon when Easter happens. So when does Easter happen? Unlike Christmas, which always falls on December 25th, Easter always has to fall on a Sunday, no matter what. So how do we determine which Sunday Easter falls on? Well, the ancient Christian system of calculating Easter is that Easter is the first Sunday following the full moon, which comes after the vernal or the spring equinox. The vernal equinox usually happens on March 20th or 21st in an astronomical sense, and the equinox is the time in the Earth's rotation around the sun where there are equal hours of daylight and nighttime. They are equal to each other. So in the spring, there's an equinox on the 21st usually. The full moon that comes after that, and then comes the next Sunday, which is then Easter. So that means that Easter at its absolute earliest can be on March 22nd, or at its latest can be on April 25th. If you want to read a little bit more about this, you can see the Book of Common Prayer, page 880, for more information. So following Easter itself, on Easter Sunday, there's then the season of Easter, or Easter Tide, and that is 49 days following Easter. 40 days after Easter, as we're told in the Gospels, Jesus appears to his disciples over a period of 40 days. And then on the 40th day, he ascends into heaven. And that is marked by a feast in the church year known as the Ascension, or Ascension Day. 10 days after Ascension, which is essentially the 50th day after Easter, is the great feast of Pentecost, when we celebrate the Holy Spirit being poured out upon the apostles, who speak in different languages. And it is essentially the birth date of the church. Just as Jesus' earthly ministry ended in a sense at his ascension, his ministry continues through his Spirit in the life and the work of Christians and through the church. And that is marked at the Feast of Pentecost. Pentecost then brings us to the end of the first half of the church year, through those first 5 seasons, and then the season of Pentecost itself finishes out the entire other half of the year, and it lasts 22 to 29 Sundays until we arrive again at the first Sunday of Advent and start a new church year again. The season of Pentecost always begins with Trinity Sunday, the Sunday right after Pentecost, and the last Sunday of Pentecost is called Christ the King. So we have the Feast of Pentecost, Trinity Sunday, and then another 20-odd weeks until we get to Christ the King, and then the first Sunday of Advent to start a new church year. During the season of Pentecost, there are a variety of other observances in the church year, most notably All Saints, which always falls on November 1st. And there are other holidays and observances such as Transfiguration, Holy Cross Day, and other observances. But these are the main ones that you need to know about if you're going to be working with the prayer book. Pentecost, Trinity Sunday, All Saints, Christ the King, and then starting a new year again on the first Sunday of Advent. So what we need to be aware of in the church year is that Lent and Advent are always the exact same length of time. Advent is always 4 Sundays. Lent is always 6 Sundays, beginning with Ash Wednesday and running through Holy Week and Palm Sunday to Easter. So those lengths of time in the church year are always the same. But if Easter changes, then the seasons of Epiphany and Pentecost flex to account for the changes in Easter's date. So if Easter falls earlier in its time frame, say in March, then Epiphany gets shorter and Pentecost gets longer. But if Easter occurs later in April, then Pentecost gets shorter and the season of Epiphany gets a little bit longer. So that's why we have to understand Pentecost and Epiphany as having a potential range of Sundays, and Advent and Lent are always fixed number of Sundays. So now let's put all this together and walk through the entire church year. We begin the church year on the first Sunday of Advent. We move through those 4 Sundays in Advent until we arrive at Christmas on December 25th. There are then 12 days in the season of Christmas until we get to January 6th with the Feast of Epiphany. Then follows the season of Epiphany for 5 to 8 weeks, again depending on when Easter falls, until we get to Lent, which begins on Ash Wednesday and runs for 6 Sundays, the last Sunday of which is Palm Sunday, and then flows Holy Week until we arrive at the Feast of Easter. Easter then has a season of its own, which runs for 49 days. On the 40th day is the Ascension, and then on the 50th day is the Feast of Pentecost, when we celebrate the Holy Spirit coming down upon the apostles and beginning the ministry of Jesus through the church. Then the season of Pentecost takes us through the other half, the remainder of the church year, for 22 to 29 weeks, and it always begins with Trinity Sunday and ends on Christ the King Sunday. And during the course of the season of Pentecost, there are a number of other observances, the most notable of which would be All Saints' Day, where we celebrate all Christians and their life and ministry in the church on November 1st. There are a couple of additional observances that we have here at St. George's that we tend to focus on, and these are just unique in our focus. Other churches may focus on these as well and include them in their liturgical observances, or they may not. But at St. George's, we also include the Feast of the Presentation, when Jesus was presented in the temple 40 days after his birth on February 2nd. We also observe the Feast of St. George, which falls on April 23rd, which is the date of the martyrdom of St. George. And then we also observe the Transfiguration Sunday on August 6th, when Jesus went up on the mount and was transfigured before the disciples Peter, James, and John. So that rounds out our discussion of the church year. Hopefully this will visually give you a sense of how we measure time in the life of the church and how it is connected to, in very particular ways, to our standard yearly calendar, but again, that it measures time a little differently and is constantly reminding us and drawing us back into the life and the teaching of Jesus Christ. Thanks for being here with me for this video, and I look forward to seeing you with our next video as we put all of this together and planning our worship services. Thanks so much.